Hey guys, it's Ian here from Fantastic Dimensions. Just want to do a little video here. I'm going to call this a series actually. I'm going to call this DM Insights. I think I've done a video about this before of this style, but it's something that I feel, I would like to do more of, to talk more about. And that's just my kind of insights from games that I've run. So last night I ran the 10th episode of the Defiance Chronicles, and we hadn't played in about 6 weeks. Just player schedules conflicting and things of that sort, but it felt really good to get the group back together again. 7 players plus myself, the DM. Yeah, so I had gotten some feedback from the players anyway over the time while we were on hiatus, as it were, and the basic story is anyway that they felt that they had spent too much time running away from fights. They'd like to feel a bit more empowered. They wanted to do a little more team building because there are a lot of new members of the crew. They wanted to kind of face an opponent that they could stand toe-to-toe with and defeat, which is fair feedback. I think that they've had lots of victories in the past, but perhaps they were feeling a little bit beat up recently because they had to run away from a couple of scenarios. So let them do that. They decided to turn and go toe-to-toe with this orc hunting ship that had been chasing them since the end of the last episode. And all the players, all 7 players, actually came up with some really cool ideas. They were all very active in the battle. There was the pilot. There was a couple of people down below on the gun decks. There were other people on the deck that were doing various spell casting, things of that sort, in support of the fight. What I really kind of picked up from this encounter, and this is nothing new and groundbreaking stuff, but it's just something that maybe I had kind of lost sight of or forgotten about, and I had to take my head out of my own cloud, my own story that I had been kind of working on with this game, and put a bit more back into the hands of the players. They came up with awesome stuff. I let them get away with some things that typically maybe I wouldn't, because maybe I stick to the rules a bit too stringently sometimes. I let them, like for example, casting some spells that were targeting parts of the ship, whereas normally there are spells that are meant to target a creature. But I thought, why not? They're in ship-to-ship combat. They're on the deck of this ship flying through space, battling another ship that's only 90 feet off the aft. Why shouldn't they be able to do some cool shit? So that was really good. So that's insight number 1. Sometimes, as a DM, and I see this in a lot of your videos, some of you guys post on your YouTube channels and stuff too, and it got me thinking. Sometimes as a DM, you just got to let go. I always have tried to riff off the players' ideas, because I don't do a whole lot of prep for my games anyway. But, and this is more of a mechanic sense, I suppose. Just let it go a little bit. Let them do cool shit. And I think they all felt really well empowered. They defeated this orc ship, which had much more advanced technology than what they were used to, because they're in this strange quadrant of space, and they're kind of lost in space, as it were. But I won't get into the details of the story. But so they defeated the ship. They got aboard. They took a prisoner. They got to fight one of these orcs. And now these are not typical D&D orcs. I've based these off of Warhammer orcs. They got to fight one of these huge roided up Hulk orcs, and defeat one toe-to-toe. They managed to avoid possibly a game-ending ship explosion, and they got a bunch of cool loot. They got to take a bunch of this advanced orc steel. They got to take a bunch of these orc weapons, which were anything from really big, heavy-ass, spiky, serrated swords, some machine guns, ammunition, and a box of grenades. All alien kind of technology to them, but they picked it up, and they're going to start learning how this stuff works. They do happen to have a gnome with them who is a cleric of knowledge. Bakub, I believe, was his god he chose to follow. So he can backwards engineer this stuff. They're going to learn a lot of cool stuff from this encounter. And then later they had another encounter, and this is my second insight. And this insight, I would say, this is what I call, this was a very organic encounter. I hadn't put a lot of prep into it. I just said, okay, there's going to be a Neogi slave barge, and it's going to have probably 1,000 or more GIF slaves working aboard it. But these slaves were like generations of slaves. They were indoctrinated slaves, basically. They willingly served their masters for the most part. But the Neogi would not be at all opposed to selling their slaves for profit. That's what they do. So the Neogi slave barge approached them, hailed them, pulled up alongside of them, sent an emissary over because they agreed to negotiate possibly a trade with these Neogi. In my mind, it was meant to be just kind of a diplomatic, kind of a cool encounter to introduce the Neogi as this huge slaver race that just don't value any organic life other than their own. And of course, since the crew of the Defiance has all these exotic aliens that aren't found in this quadrant of space, being, humans, half-elves, elves, a Githzerai, which is, there's other interesting things about that, a gnome. Of course, the Neogi were very interested in these exotic slaves and wanted them, tried to negotiate a trade. Unfortunately, the crew put somebody in charge who wasn't necessarily great at negotiating, and actually kind of piqued the Neogi's interest a bit too much, to where the Neogi decided, oh well, I cannot let these guys go. I have to have these slaves now. So it turned into a combat encounter in the end, which wasn't intended, but it made an interesting moral conundrum for the players, because then they had to decide whether or not to let the Neogi go after they had crippled their ship, or to destroy the ship because it had too much knowledge about them and their particular ship and crew. In the end, they decided they couldn't allow that knowledge to escape with the Neogi. They had to destroy the Neogi, or else they were going to have this at least one race of aliens again just constantly hounding them, coming after them to get these slaves. Because they have one particular, now they're not really slaves, they're crew members, but to the Neogi they're all slaves. They have this one particular alien, the Githzerai, and in my kind of universe here that I'm creating, the Githzerai in this quadrant of space are seen as the uplifters. They were not just the Githzerai, but the Gith in general are called the uplifters. They're like this race of founders who kind of raised up all the other races to civilization before completely disappearing, which is just kind of an interesting twist on things. Once the Neogi knew that they had one of these beings on their ship, they had to have it. It's the most valuable slave they could ever think of in the universe. So in the end, the crew decided they had to destroy the ship, killing hundreds, if not over 1,000 slaves. So it was interesting. I don't hope the players aren't too frustrated with it, but it was an organic encounter. I honestly didn't have it planned. It's just the way I bounced off of the things that they said and the way they acted in the game. So, which is something that I do with a lot of my stuff. I didn't have any kind of a resolution planned. It was all up to them. Anyway, that's my first DM's Insight video. Had a great session last night. Just a couple of things that I wanted to share with you. I'll do more of these in future for maybe one-shots or campaign sessions that I run. Anything that I think is worthy to share, from a DM's perspective. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you at the gaming table.